We have lots to discuss here in today's video, including some offseason trade speculation. Today's teams we're focusing on include the New York Rangers, the Boston Bruins, the Carolina Hurricanes, and the Calgary Flames. Plus, we have our first suspension of the playoffs for Brandon Hagel, the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Ottawa Senators have been fined $25,000, as well as a fine for forward Nick Cousins, in a really odd, bizarre scenario, which we'll discuss a little bit further. Plus, lots of playoff action to update tonight, including a real crazy game in Montreal between the Habs and the Capitals. And we have some other signings, including some prospects in Minnesota. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to discuss here in today's video, including our first suspensions. Well, we'll kick things off here. Of course, I do have another video on the channel going into a little bit more detail, but Brandon Hagel, the Tampa Bay Lightning, has been suspended for one game for interference. Essentially, he laid out Panthers captain Barkov last night, and of course, at this point, Barkov did not have the puck. He was going for the puck, never got there, and he laid him out. He was not eligible to be hit. It was a big hit as well, and they called it a 5-minute major for interference, and now he's been suspended for one playoff game. So he will not be available as Tampa Bay tries to claw their way back into the series in Game 3, which is actually an early start tomorrow as well, 1 o'clock Eastern time. So clearly with the news coming down, they had to get that news out tonight so that the Lightning were aware if he was going to be available or not. Some other big news as well. The 2018 World Junior Championship players, 5 former NHL players that are under trial right now for sexual assault, had a big development in their case today with the judge declaring a mistrial. Now, that doesn't mean that they're off the hook, they're not facing charges or anything like that. All it means is that it's basically going to be a delay. Now, what had happened earlier in the week, there was the judge when they came back from lunch yesterday, there was a development where the judge said they were going to have to end things early, that something had happened over their lunch break that they had to think about and talk to both of the lawyers about. So we didn't really know what it was, but figured it had to be something pretty serious or substantial that could sway things one way or the other. So they had to declare a mistrial, something to do with the jury. Now, of course, the jury has to be able to do their job properly, and if they can't, then that's what can cause that. So what was going to be going on here is that they were going to have to be choosing a new jury throughout the day today. My understanding of the situation is that the trial will kind of restart next week, but we'll have to wait for some further updates there. We're not expecting to see a mistrial. I know when they were going through jury selection, the reporters were allowed to talk about a lot of things that were was going on that day in the court, and it's probably a little bit challenging, I'm sure, to get people who you can guarantee that are not going to be impartial one way or another, don't already have their minds made up about the case or what have you. But yeah, it's an unfortunate development there in that case, so we'll have to wait for further updates. Now, there was a publication ban on the reasons why, so the reporters were not able to say anything as to what was the reasons behind the mistrial happening, but it had to have something to do with the jury. That's about as far as we know. Now, a really weird scenario unfolded here today, which I don't think a lot of people seen coming. But of course, last night was Game 3 in the Battle of Ontario. Ottawa versus Toronto. First game in Ottawa for playoff hockey in 8 years since 2017. The building was rocking. It was full. They did a pretty good job of making sure Sens fans were not overrun by Leaf fans in the building. Of course, you're not going to keep them out completely. There was definitely a decent amount of Leaf fans, but it wasn't to the level you normally see in the regular season where you can actually hear "Go Leaf, Go" chants and feel overwhelmed. You feel like you're on the road, and that wasn't the case. But apparently there was an incident that happened in warm-ups. Apparently prompted a league investigation. So this first popped up here earlier today, and there's a video on the channel about this from this morning as well, talking about this. But TSN's Darren Dreger was first to report that the league was investigating. It wasn't sure if there'd be any discipline or not, but something had happened during warm-ups. Essentially what had happened was Anthony Stolarz of the Leafs, like most goalies do, was over by the boards near center ice, going through his prep and stretching routine. Nick Cousins of the Ottawa Senators, and somebody who has been teammates with numerous times with Stolarz, knows him quite well, as he skates by, shoots a puck towards him. Now, it wasn't a hard shot. It wasn't a big clapper bomb. It was just a boom, how you doing? Just trying to throw him off his game. Things like that happen pretty much all the time during warm-up. If you watched all the games all the time and could see all the stuff in warm-ups, like, it's not unusual. Does it happen every game? No, but it's often enough. And it's really not a big deal about it. But because of that little incident, the league has fined Nick Cousins for unsportsmanlike conduct, a maximum allowed in the CBA, $2,083, which was ridiculous enough. And then we find out a little bit later that the team has also been fined $25,000. I honestly starting to think Gary Bettman just absolutely hates Michael Andlauer. Just a little bit of pretext and history there. At one point, I think, obviously, for Michael Andlauer to be accepted as the new owner of the Senators, clearly had to be viewed upon quite favorably and looked, somebody that they were quite fond of wanting to do business with. Of course, before this, he was a minority owner of the Montreal Canadiens, well-respected businessman. I think the league was quite happy to have him get involved here. But then, of course, that sale process was a little bit, it drug on a long time, and there was some stuff that Andlauer wasn't happy with that was kept from him, a few secrets, if you will, and, they were not afraid to call him out. Obviously, once the league handed down that punishment to the Senators of losing the first-round pick, Andlauer publicly let the league have it and spoke his mind. And ever since then, it just feels like they've been a little harsher on them when it comes to not like the game stuff, but, obviously like Gary Bettman, his treatment of Andlauer just feels different. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Maple Leaf players were asked about this. Morgan Rielly, Brandon Carlo were both interviewed doing media today, asked about it. They're like, yeah. Rielly said, I didn't see it, but it happens all the time. It's not a big deal. Carlo basically said the same sort of thing. Anthony Stolarz, on the other hand, was I didn't catch the whole clip, but I know part of what I heard him say was that he asked the refs to protect him and that he would kind of, behave himself or something like that. I'm like, would Anthony Stolarz actually go to the league and complain about this? This is just a friendly little thing with his former teammate. Like, I don't get it. So I'm not sure how it came about, but we've seen numerous other situations. Like for tonight, Montreal, Washington, Jack-Eye and Wilson were jawing at each other at center ice. Okay, well, is that unsportsmanlike? Yeah, technically. I mean, we've seen players cross center ice sometimes. There's just little things. I just don't understand. To me, it's so stupid. I don't get why the league is getting involved. Makes absolutely no sense to me, but whatever. There's nothing you can do about it, but it's a pretty wild situation. So I'm not sure if they'll be clamping down on things that go on in warm-up or not. I know Elliot Friedman made mention that the Jets and Blues also were, sounds like they were given more of a warning, if you will, but Scheifele, who likes to be the last player off the ice, was staying on the ice after warm-ups, and Joel Hofer, Winnipeg native, mind you, a backup goalie for the Blues, kind of was messing with him because he was staying out too because he knows Scheifele likes to be the last one off, and he started shooting pucks down their end. Is that unsportsmanlike? It's really no different. Nobody's hurt. It's just, but meanwhile, you see people in the playoffs getting cross-checked in the face with no calls. Well, that's okay. Player safety, that's cross-check to the face is all right. But, you can't lightly shoot a puck towards a friend and former teammate just to say, hey, I'm here and I'm going to bug you. Just as a friendly little playful gesture like that. That's not allowed in this very unserious NHL league. Yes, makes no sense to me, but anyways, we'll move on here. The Minnesota Wild today signed goalie Riley Mercer to a 3-year entry-level contract. He's a 21-year-old goalie from the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, played his full junior career with Drummondville. In 23-24, he led that team to a league championship, and over the 5 years he's been in juniors with Drummondville, he's racked up franchise records now as the leader in all-time wins, shutouts, games played, and save percentage. He is the brother to Devils forward Dawson Mercer as well, so he gets a 3-year entry-level contract with Minnesota as an undrafted junior free agent. Of course, a few updates around playoff hockey here tonight as well. Montreal went into tonight's game against the Capitals and pulled out a victory, 6-3, but they did go in with a different lineup. Patrick Laine was out. They called it an upper body injury, but I honestly wonder if it's really just a healthy scratch. They don't want to embarrass him. But he's out of the lineup regardless tonight. Certainly was benched in the third period in the previous game, which is why you kind of wonder, he wasn't playing well, wasn't really engaged, which is what you get a lot with Laine. So, yeah, he was out tonight. Struble was out for Jack-Eye. They put Jack-Eye in. It was a chaotic game with Wilson and and Anderson ended up fighting on the bench. Complete chaos ensued. It was ridiculous. Both starting goaltenders ended up getting hurt. Montembeault left the game with what looked to be a hamstring injury, and then later, some friendly fire. Dylan Strome on a back check accidentally plows over Logan Thompson. So both starting goaltenders out of the game. We're into Lindgren versus Dobush now, and it may stay that way for the rest of the series. It's hard to say. I know Thompson, to me, I'd be shocked if he comes back. That looked bad. Whereas, with Montembeault it looked like he grabbed his hamstring after a save. I don't know the extent of it, so it's hard to say what the odds are of him coming back in the series or not. We'll know more in the next day or two, I'm sure. But, crazy game there. Alexei Protas was also still missed out. He was out of the lineup for the Capitals as well. We also have the Oilers trying to get back into the series tonight with Los Angeles. They're off to a good start tonight. 2-0 early in that one. And, of course, I know right now Carolina and New Jersey's in Game 3. Carolina trying to take a stranglehold, and the Devils trying to stay alive. Right now it's tied at 2, getting late into the third as I sit down to record this video. So we'll see what happens there. So tomorrow will be a big day full of hockey as well. All kinds of games going on this weekend. Lots of other news too. For Edmonton, actually, one other quick note. Stuart Skinner not starting tonight. Calvin Pickard in the net for the Edmonton Oilers. So going with a different look there. Now, when it comes to the offseason stuff, I want to start with one of the prospects that was supposed to be signing here, and that is Nikishin in Carolina. Now, of course, we got word that he was leaving the KHL like last week. He was going through getting his work visas, eventually get all that sorted, arrived in Carolina, but he still does not have a contract. And his Russian agent put out some statements today that certainly seemed quite concerning, saying that he's still unsigned, saying that the Carolina Hurricanes' behavior is confusing and they are the most complicated team in the NHL to deal with. And if it continues, that we could see Nikishin either head back to Russia or ask for a trade. Now, his North American-based agent, that would be handling the NHL contract, also put out a statement saying that basically they're confident they can overcome the things that have come up, which is why there's no contract signed here as of yet. For a player like Nikishin, it's probably going to boil down to the bonuses that they will or will not give as part of the contract. Rookie contracts are one of the easier ones to negotiate. So if he's going to be able to play in the playoffs, that has to start this year, clearly. I thought that part seemed like, it was already kind of agreed upon informally. So I don't know. We'll have to see. But this Nikishin deal, if this doesn't get sorted and he ends up demanding a trade, that could be a major blow for the Hurricanes. But I mean, like the comments here from the Russian agent, basically saying how difficult Carolina is to deal with. And it's not just this scenario. They said, it's pretty much all the time that this team is just crazy how it does business and so complicated and challenging to work with. So we'll have to monitor that situation and see what's going on with Nikishin. Rumor out of Calgary would be from Pat Steinberg, who's on Flames Radio for Sportsnet 960. And he's been saying this for a while, but he brought it up here yet again, saying that if Florida Panther centerman and former Flame Sam Bennett makes it to free agency on July 1st, he really expects the Calgary Flames to make a big push to bring him back to the organization. Honestly, looking back, I think of all the moves Brad Treliving made as Flames GM, that might be one of the ones he'd like a do-over on. And certainly, at the time, if you look through Bennett's history with the Flames during his first run there, you could see how it was getting to a point where, okay, maybe he needs a fresh start, new scenery. Wasn't working out. I mean, he was drafted so high that he came in with really high expectations. Like, a lot of people probably thought he was going to be like 100-point forward. And obviously his game has evolved and he's a very effective player. But his game really took off after going to Florida. I found when he was in Calgary, I was always baffled with his usage. And maybe it was just the coaches they had at the time. But, I mean, you could have him up in the top 6. He'd perform. Then he'd be back down on the fourth line. He could just never get the trust of the organization and the coaching staff to have a consistent role higher up in the lineup to play for his skill set, and kind of became a bottom 6 grinder. And it probably in a way might have helped round out his game because, I mean, he was always a little scrappy in the younger days too, in junior and stuff. That's not completely new for Bennett, but Yeah, like it's just, for a guy who's highly skilled though, like just because he can play a rough style of game, doesn't mind the physical stuff, he thrives on it, he can be a bit of a rat, but he is highly skilled, and he can play with highly skilled players, and he showed that at the Four Nation tournament. So I was always confused by the Flames' usage of him. So, for him, would he make sense for the Flames? If you look at their lineup, they definitely could use a couple of more forwards that can produce. And obviously he brings a whole different element. And so they have, connection to him from his first run as a Flame as well. So will he want to go there? No. Now Steinberg's made it clear as well that he suspects that the Panthers are going to do everything they can to keep him, and that this may not even be an option. And I think that's probably fair. But if the Panthers have another long playoff run, if they're not talking during the playoffs, which you think they're probably not, and the fact that we're almost May and he doesn't have a contract, teams are holding out hope that they're going to have a chance to talk to this guy. And much as Florida would like to keep him, it is going to be a challenge because he's had a great run with that contract, certainly outperformed it, and is going to be getting a good raise somewheres. Was his first choice to stay in Florida? Probably. But he's also going to have an opportunity to cash in here. And as much as he likes it, if it's that much of a difference to leave, then he may do so. So watch the Flames to be heavy on Bennett if indeed he makes it to free agency. Now, former New York Ranger and current analyst for the NHL Network, Brian Boyle, calls out current Ranger and I believe somebody he played with in the past, Mika Zibanejad. Now, of course, we know the Rangers had a tough season. A lot of the Rangers players wanted to, it seemed like they were very much at odds with the front office. They were not fond of the way Chris Drury was doing business. They were not fond of how their teammates like Barclay Goodrow, Jacob Trouba, and etc. were handled and dealt with. And I understand that. And I can see how it caused issues in the room. And it also caused, I think, some players to quit on the organization because they felt, I think, that the organization didn't have their backs, and they figured, why should I have theirs? I think it's really kind of a tit-for-tat type of situation, which is kind of immature in a way. But I do understand, I think, to some degree, why they felt the way they did. But as Boyle says about Mika, he says, listen, your job is to play center. Your job is to be a top center on this team and to score goals and be a consistent power play contributor. You're a leader on the team. You wear a letter. What they do with their cap space and how they allocate it and who they're going to make trades for or with or handle things at the draft and all that, that is not your job. That's the front office's job. So basically, worry about your on-ice play and not worry about what the GM is doing. And if you would have focused more on yourself and being the best version of yourself, then maybe the team would have done better this year, in spite of those things that were bothering some of the players. I don't know that he's really wrong. It's hard to, obviously without being somebody who's been in that exact position, it's hard to imagine, but curious to see, like I said, a former player who not only a former player, but a player with ties to the organization who would know some of these players and would have played with some of these guys, to be saying that goes to show you that most players don't really think about or to some degree care too much what's going on in the business side of the team. The job is to focus on producing and being the best versions of themselves to help the team. And when you stop doing that, you're not going to produce, and it's just going to make matters worse. So it's fully expected here that Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider are possibly going to be moving on from the Rangers this offseason. I think Kreider is more likely, especially based on how things ended. I think the team is going to shop Zibanejad, but he does have more control on the trade protection. So, and he's already made it pretty clear that he has a clause in his contract. Both sides agreed to it, and he seems most likely to invoke it and not waive. But we saw what happened to Jacob Trouba. Like, they will make your life miserable if you don't help them move on. And if you don't want to play ball, like I said, they'll figure out a way to make you miserable so that you will. So we'll see what happens, but expect big changes in the Big Apple, and clearly Zibanejad and Kreider right at the top of that list. And if that's the way a former teammate feels about Mika, then imagine what maybe some of the other guys around the team might feel like too, because not everybody quit on that team. But I think guys like Kreider was probably the most, and I know he said at the end of the year he's going through some injuries and stuff, but still hard to, just the effort didn't look there a lot of nights. So we'll see what happens. Now, also in Boston, RG.org writer Jimmy Murphy, the latest article, says that he feels, based on what is being told to them around from executives around the league, that there's a good chance we're going to see the Boston Bruins and goalie Jonas Korpisalo probably have a split this offseason, with reports from Friedman and Pagnotta both saying that they expect not necessarily for Boston to shop Jeremy Swayman this offseason, but for teams to be calling and inquiring, and they're going to probably end up having a lot of conversations around him because of the interest around the league. Now, like I said then, it's not shocking. It's not surprising. Will they end up trading him? I mean, I guess if they get the right deal, you always have to consider it. Nobody is untradeable, but it's unlikely. Now, Korpisalo more likely here. Like, obviously, he made it pretty clear based on his end-of-season comments that he wanted to play more, that he wasn't happy about that. And I know Don Sweeney even referenced that in his end-of-season remarks at their unusual press conference there the other day when they were being snippy with reporters. So, he mentioned that, Korpisalo could maybe play more next year, but I don't know. I think for what they're paying Swayman, I think they're going to expect him to play a lot, and it's only fair. And if he's not playing well enough to play a lot, well, that's a bigger problem. So basically, the reports from Jimmy Murphy was that Korpisalo's agent, Marcus Leto, has let the Bruins know that unless it's part of the plan to play him more in a tandem style and get him a bunch more games, that his client, Korpisalo, would prefer, and they're not demanding it right now, but would much prefer a change of scenery and a trade. So, again, league executives are telling Murphy that they're hearing his name coming up more and more in trade chatter around the NHL. Of course, like I said, only half the league is pretty well involved in that to some degree. I mean, not to say playoff teams can't be having some conversations for the future for the summer, but obviously the 16 teams right now that are out are probably a little bit more busy with planning and talking and that kind of stuff. Other teams are more focused still on the playoffs. So either way, I think it's fair to say that the Bruins don't come back with the same goalie tandem next year, and a pretty good chance that either Korpi or Swayman goes. Korpisalo probably being the more likely, but again, he didn't really perform better than he did the year before in Ottawa. On a longer-term contract, I think he's down to 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. That's not going to be easy to move. Ottawa did retain a little bit in the move, in the trade they made with Boston for Allmark, but is Boston going to want to retain a little bit more? Can they get anything? They're already having, regrets here by the looks of it after a year. I mean, he did not really fare all that well. But again, this might be more of a case of them trading him because of his request, more so than their own feelings. So we'll have to see about that. But so interesting things ahead here in the offseason. So let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.